If I come up missing or end up gone, it is no accident. Imagine hearing those words from your own mother. A chilling prophecy. A desperate plea wrapped in a statement of fact. For Kim Freytag, this wasn't a line from a horror movie. It was a real warning delivered with the heavy weight of fear from her mother, 53-year-old Martha Freytag. A few weeks later, Martha vanished. Honestly, this case barely made a ripple in the media. No major headlines, no in-depth reports, just a few short blurbs scattered across the internet. If you try searching on Google, you'll only find the bare minimum: who the suspect was, who the victim was, and how it all ended. Period. Nothing more, nothing less. And that's what frustrates me. The horrifying details of this crime, the kind that could keep you awake at night, were buried and forgotten. That's why I'm here. To uncover everything they never told you, and to bring to light the dark, twisted truth behind this terrifying case. To her daughter, the conclusion was terrifyingly simple. Her mother's abusive boyfriend, David Callahan, was responsible. But when Kim frantically reported her concerns to the Akron, Ohio Police Department, she was met with a calm, procedural skepticism. To them, Martha wasn't a potential murder victim. She was a 53-year-old woman with a documented history of schizophrenia, an adult who had, in their view, likely just walked away. They were tragically, horrifyingly wrong. Hello everyone, welcome back. The case we are examining today is a harrowing journey into the shadows of domestic violence, a stark look at how mental illness can render a victim invisible, and a powerful testament to a daughter's relentless love. This is a story about warnings that were ignored, a system that failed, and a horrifying secret buried just inches beneath the soil of a quiet suburban backyard. Our story begins in Akron, Ohio. It's a city forged in the heart of America's Rust Belt, a place with a proud industrial past and a resilient spirit. And like any city, it's a collection of a million smaller stories, most of them unfolding quietly behind the doors of its countless homes. Martha Robin Freytag's story was one of these. To understand the tragedy of her death, we must first understand the complexities of her life. Martha wasn't just a headline or a statistic. She was a mother, a friend, a woman who battled formidable demons long before David Callahan ever entered her life. Born and raised in Akron, Martha was described by those who knew her best as a woman with a huge heart, a quick laugh, and a fiercely loyal nature. Her daughter Kim remembers a childhood filled with warmth and affection. She recalls her mother's love for gardening, the way she could spend hours tending to her flowers, creating small pockets of beauty. Her mother was her anchor, a woman who, despite her own struggles, always put her daughter first, making sure Kim felt loved and secure, even when the world outside felt threatening. But Martha's life was shadowed by a formidable opponent, schizoaffective disorder. It's a chronic mental health condition characterized by symptoms of both schizophrenia, like hallucinations or delusions, and mood disorders like mania or depression. For Martha, it was a lifelong battle. There were periods of stability, moments of clarity and joy where her true personality shone through. But there were also dark periods, episodes of intense paranoia and confusion that made navigating the world a terrifying challenge. During these times, a simple trip to the grocery store could feel like a monumental task, the faces of strangers appearing menacing, the everyday sounds of the world amplified into a chaotic symphony. Personally, I see this illness as a silent war most of us never notice. Have you ever witnessed a good day turn on a dime? Share what that looked like. Your insight could help someone here. This illness made her vulnerable. It strained her relationships, made it difficult to hold down a job, and left her reliant on disability income. It created a level of isolation that would later prove to be a fatal liability. Society is often unkind to those it doesn't understand, and the stigma surrounding severe mental illness meant that Martha was often misunderstood, her fears dismissed as symptoms, her reality questioned. She existed in a gray area, a place where it was difficult for outsiders to distinguish between a genuine threat and a paranoid delusion. It was in this state of vulnerability that she met David Callahan. David was on the surface a stark contrast to Martha. He presented himself as a steady, capable man. He had a job, a place to live, and an air of confidence. To a woman whose life often felt chaotic and unstable, he might have seemed like a safe harbor. He could be charming, attentive, and protective. In the beginning, their relationship likely felt like a blessing to Martha. She had found a partner, a companion to weather the storms with. But David Callahan had his own demons. While less is publicly known about his early life, his behavior painted a picture of a man with deep-seated issues of control and a volatile temper. He was not the savior Martha thought he was. He was a predator who had found the perfect prey, a woman whose existing vulnerabilities he could exploit for his own gain. He saw her illness not as a part of her to be understood and supported, but as a weakness to be leveraged. Their home, a small, unassuming house in a working-class Akron neighborhood, did not look like the scene of a horror story. It looked like any other house on the street. But inside, a quiet, insidious form of terror was taking root. Domestic abuse is often misunderstood. We picture shouting matches, broken plates, and visible bruises. While those things are certainly part of it, the most dangerous form of abuse is often the most subtle. It's called coercive control, and David Callahan was a master of it. Coercive control is a strategic campaign of intimidation, isolation, and manipulation used to rob a person of their autonomy and freedom. It's not about a single argument. It's about creating a psychological prison. For David, Martha's mental illness was not a challenge to be supported, but a tool to be used. The first step was isolation. David began to systematically sever Martha's ties to the outside world. Friends who called would be told that Martha was having a bad day and couldn't talk. Visits from family became tense, with David hovering, monitoring every conversation. Soon, the calls and visits stopped altogether. He became her sole gatekeeper, the architect of her loneliness. This isolation also served to make her more dependent on him, reinforcing his control. Kim felt this shift acutely. Her relationship with her mother, once close and open, became strained. "He hated me," Kim would later say. "He knew I was the one person who saw him for what he was, and he couldn't stand it." David would manufacture arguments, tell Martha that Kim was a bad influence, and poison the one relationship that gave Martha strength. He turned her daughter into a source of conflict, further tightening his grip. Next came financial control. Martha's disability checks were her only source of income, her only means of independence. David took control of them. He would cash the checks, giving Martha a small, humiliating allowance, while he used the rest for his own purposes. She was left to ask for money for groceries, for cigarettes, for basic necessities. This financial dependency was a powerful chain. Leaving wasn't just emotionally difficult, it was financially impossible. He had effectively made her a prisoner in her own home. Then came the psychological warfare. David exploited Martha's paranoia, a key symptom of her illness. He would gaslight her, denying things he had said or done, making her question her own sanity. He would tell her that her friends and family were against her, that he was the only one she could trust. He became her entire reality, a twisted funhouse mirror version of it where he was the hero and everyone else was the enemy. He likely controlled her access to medication as well, a common tactic for abusers to keep their victims destabilized and easier to manipulate. And of course, there was the fear. The threats were constant, a low hum of menace in the background of her life. They weren't always overt. Sometimes it was a look, a slammed door, a comment made under his breath. But Martha knew what he was capable of. The arguments would escalate into physical violence, leaving bruises she would try to hide from Kim on the rare occasions they could meet in secret. This was the cage Martha was living in. It was a prison built not with bars and locks, but with fear, dependency, and manipulation. Her 911 calls to the police became a desperate, repeated cry for help from a woman trapped in an invisible jail. But here, her illness worked against her once more. To the responding officers, the frequent calls combined with her known mental health status began to form a narrative. They weren't seeing a victim of calculated abuse. They were seeing a problematic address, a mentally ill woman in a toxic relationship. Each call, instead of increasing the urgency, seemed to diminish her credibility. This is a phenomenon known as diagnostic overshadowing, where a person's physical or psychological symptoms are wrongly attributed to their mental health diagnosis. It's a cognitive bias that can lead medical and law enforcement professionals to dismiss legitimate concerns. This systemic misunderstanding would soon have fatal consequences. On a Monday morning, Martha Freytag made her last call to 911. The dispatcher who took the call heard a voice that was not just upset but terrified. Martha was asking for an emergency restraining order. She had reached a breaking point. Something had happened that convinced her that her life was in imminent danger. Police were dispatched as they had been before, but the cycle repeated itself. By the time they arrived, the immediate crisis had likely de-escalated. David was probably calm, rational, and persuasive. Martha, perhaps agitated and struggling to articulate her fear, was the one who seemed unstable. No arrest was made. No order was granted. The officers left, and Martha was left alone with her tormentor. And what's truly heartbreaking is how this interaction unfolded. Body cam footage reveals a scene of utter confusion. Martha's words were scattered, her thoughts disjointed, clear signs of a person in the throes of a mental health crisis, yes, but also of extreme terror. She was trying to explain a threat that was very real to her, but it came out in a way that officers just couldn't or wouldn't decipher. It was a cry for help in a language they failed to understand. And the most chilling part, while Martha was outside desperately trying to make sense to the officers, David Callahan was inside the house, waiting. He was just feet away, a predator calmly watching as his last chance of being stopped walked away from his front door. Think about that. The police, the very people meant to protect her, essentially gave him the green light. It's a failure of the system so profound it's hard to stomach. It wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was a death sentence. We will never know the exact events of that day, but we know it was the day the countdown to her murder began, shortly after Martha Freytag went silent. For her daughter Kim, the silence was immediate and deafening. Their daily phone calls were a lifeline for both of them. It was how Kim monitored her mother's safety and how Martha felt connected to the outside world. When her mother stopped answering, Kim knew this wasn't a symptom of her illness. This wasn't Martha choosing to be out of touch. This was a 5-alarm fire. Her first calls went straight to voicemail. Then she started texting, a barrage of messages filled with increasing panic. "Mom, call me, please. Are you okay? I'm getting worried." No response. She called again and again. Nothing. After 24 hours of silence, Kim's worry turned into pure terror. She drove to the house. She knocked on the door, her heart pounding against her ribs. She peered through the windows. The house was dark and still. No one answered. Her next call was to the Akron Police Department. When Kim Freytag walked into the police station, she was a daughter on the verge of collapse. She explained the situation with frantic urgency. Her mother was gone. She hadn't answered her phone in days. This was completely out of character. And she was with a violent, controlling man who had threatened to kill her. But from behind the desk, her plea was filtered through the lens of procedure. The officer listened, took notes, and saw a familiar story. A family dispute, a mentally ill woman, an adult who was by law free to go where she pleased. Kim could probably see the skepticism in his eyes. The call between Kim and the police began with the officer's calm, procedural tone. He wanted to know if her mother had ever gone missing before. Kim's voice trembled as she explained that yes, it had happened once during a mental health episode, but never like this. Her mother always called her, always checked in. This time felt different. When the officer asked whether her mother was taking her medication, Kim's frustration broke through. She said she didn't know because the man her mother lived with controlled all of it. That was part of the problem. The officer tried to reassure her, saying they understood her concern. But without any evidence of foul play, they couldn't open a full-scale investigation. His words hung heavy in the silence that followed, and Kim was left gripping the phone, a cold wave of dread washing over her. Kim pleaded with the police, her voice breaking as she begged them to believe her. She insisted that her mother was in danger, that something terrible must have happened, and that David had likely done something he shouldn't have. Deep down, she feared the unthinkable, that her mother might already be gone. Despite her insistence, the police department's official response was constrained. They classified Martha as a missing person, but it was not treated as a high-priority endangered case. They agreed to perform a welfare check, a procedural box to be ticked. This was the system's first and perhaps most critical opportunity to save Martha's life, or at the very least uncover the crime. And what happened next is just infuriating. The transcript of their interaction with Kim outside the house shows a daughter practically screaming for help, only to be met with bureaucratic platitudes. Kim laid it all out, the threats, the schizophrenia, her mother's chilling warning. Her fear was palpable. But the officers advised her against filing a missing persons report just yet. Why? Because Martha was a grown woman with mental health issues. If for whatever reason she has gone into the state where she doesn't want anybody to contact her. One officer explained, The hospital is legally not allowed to tell anybody anything. It was a textbook response that completely ignored the terrifying context. And here's where it gets even worse. Unbeknownst to those officers, David was inside the house the entire time, hiding in silence, listening to them talk Kim out of taking official action. Can you imagine the audacity? The sheer cold-blooded nerve. He was a silent observer to a conversation about his own crime. He eventually came to the door, a mask of calm normalcy on his face. He lied with an ease that was sociopathic. "She's probably at her friend's house," he said dismissively. "You know how she gets." And with that single phrase, he allied himself with the officer's existing bias. He was the sane one. She was the problem. They took him at his word and left. David Callahan closed the door, having stared down the law and won. And as he stood there, he was guarding a secret of unimaginable horror buried just yards from where those officers had been standing. What an absolute catastrophic failure. The police's perfunctory welfare check was a devastating blow for Kim. The system she had been taught to trust had failed her. But in that moment of despair, something shifted. Grief and fear forged themselves into an unshakable resolve. If no one else would search for her mother, she would. Kim Freytag became a detective. She was not trained. She had no resources. But she had something more powerful than any police badge, a daughter's love, and an instinct that screamed that her mother's life was over. Her investigation was a grueling 24/7 obsession. She started by creating a meticulous list of every person her mother had ever known. She transformed her living room into a command center with notes and names taped to the walls. She spent hours upon hours on the phone, her voice growing hoarse from repeating the same painful script. "Hi, this is Kim, Martha's daughter. I'm sorry to bother you, but have you seen or heard from my mom?" She had to endure the pity in their voices, the awkward silences. Each call was a new wave of disappointment. Most hadn't heard from Martha in months, even years. David's campaign of isolation had been brutally effective. With each no, a piece of hope died, but her conviction that David was responsible only grew stronger. She was not just looking for a missing person. She was hunting for a killer. She felt utterly alone, a solitary warrior fighting a battle no one else seemed to see. She took to the streets. She printed homemade missing person flyers with a picture of her mother smiling, a photo from a happier time. Throughout this agonizing process, she continued to call the Akron police, begging for updates, feeding them any scrap of information she could find. But she was met with a bureaucratic wall. This wasn't just passive resistance. Kim was actively fighting an uphill battle. At one point, her frustration boiled over. She returned to the house with officers and, fed up with the inaction, essentially gave them an ultimatum. Then came the texts. Kim started receiving messages from her mother's phone, but the tone, the phrasings, it was all wrong. It wasn't her mom. When Kim demanded to know where she was, the person on the other end gave her the runaround, "I'm at the Kingdom Hall in Kent." Kim replied, "Okay, stay there. I'm coming right now." The immediate response, "Oh, I'm not there. You don't know where I am." It was a cruel, taunting game. Kim knew with every fiber of her being that it was David on the other end impersonating her dead mother. And still, no one would listen. It's absolutely maddening. She was a number, a case file. To her, this was the only thing in the world that mattered. To them, it was one of many. This is the lonely, frustrating reality for many families of missing persons. They are thrust into a world of police procedure and legal limitations they don't understand, all while grappling with the worst pain imaginable. Kim learned that a missing adult who is not considered endangered, a high bar to clear, does not trigger the kind of all-hands-on-deck investigation we see in movies. The search is often passive, a matter of waiting for a lead to fall into their laps. Kim knew she couldn't wait. She had to create the lead herself. As the weeks turned into a month, the physical and emotional toll was immense. She wasn't sleeping. She was barely eating. She was consumed by the search. And then a breakthrough, a sliver of light in the suffocating darkness. It came in the form of a simple anonymous text message. It appeared on her phone from an unknown number, just a few cryptic words. Who sent it? A neighbor who heard screams or saw something strange that night, a friend of David's. Their conscience finally getting the better of them, we will likely never know. But that anonymous messenger was a hero. Their text was the key that would unlock the entire case. It read, "Check the fire pit in the backyard." The backyard, the one place shielded from public view, the one place that was David Callahan's private kingdom. The message was terrifying, but it was also a validation. It confirmed everything Kim had suspected. It was the first concrete piece of information that pointed to a specific location. It told her she wasn't crazy. Her instincts were right all along. With this new ammunition, Kim went back to the police. This time, she was not just an emotional daughter with a hunch. She laid out the timeline, the threats, the history of abuse, and now this tip. The specificity of the message combined with Kim's relentless pressure finally broke through the inertia. The police agreed to return to the house on Valdez Avenue. This time it would not be a simple welfare check. This time they would come with a search warrant. When detectives arrived, the dynamic had shifted completely. David Callahan was no longer a person to be questioned on his doorstep. He was the primary suspect in a homicide investigation. He was immediately separated and taken to the station for questioning, while a team of forensic investigators began the grim task of dissecting the property. With each shovelful of dirt, the air grew thicker with dread, and then the shovel struck something. It wasn't the dull thud of a rock. It was a soft, yielding resistance. The detective dropped to his knees, scraping away the loose soil with his gloved hands. The first thing he uncovered was a piece of fabric. Then the unmistakable, horrifying shape of a human limb. The lead detective on the scene, Jack Lamb, made the call over his radio. His voice was clinical, a professional mask over the horror of the moment. "Seems like a body part," he said. They had found Martha Freytag. The excavation of the shallow site confirmed the unthinkable. Martha had been killed, and steps were taken to hide what happened before she was buried. Investigators later tied those actions to David turning Kim's dread into certainty. The search of the home yielded more. Next to the bed, investigators found an axe handle. It was clean, but forensic analysis would later confirm it was one of the murder weapons. The quiet suburban house had been the scene of a savage, calculated murder. While forensic teams carefully excavated his backyard, turning a patch of ordinary earth into a gravesite, David Callahan sat in a small, sterile interrogation room at the Akron police station. For hours, he was the very picture of a grieved victimhood. This was not a man burdened by guilt, but a performer playing his final role. He painted a portrait of himself as the long-suffering partner, a man pushed to the edge by a mentally unstable woman whose erratic behavior had made his life a living hell. His demeanor was calm, collected, and utterly defiant. In his mind, he was the one who had been wronged. Across from him, detectives Jack Lamb and Donnie Williams began a slow, methodical, psychological chess match. As seasoned investigators, they had seen this performance countless times. It's a crucial lesson in understanding the abuser's mindset. The truth is fluid, and reality is whatever narrative best serves their own self-interest. They knew that behind the calm facade, a monstrous truth was hiding. Their strategy wasn't to break him with force, but to let him meticulously build his own prison of lies brick by brick. They gave him enough rope to hang himself, letting him spin his elaborate fantasy. This approach is a masterclass in interrogation. By allowing a suspect to build a tall, elaborate house of cards, the eventual collapse when confronted with hard facts is all the more devastating. For hours, David talked, constructing a reality in which Martha's struggles, her paranoia, and her outbursts were the central conflict. He was laying the groundwork for a self-defense claim, or perhaps just to bolster his original flimsy story that she had simply run away. He was the hero of his own tragic story. But the detectives already had the truth buried in his backyard. After letting him exhaust his initial fiction, they slowly began to introduce the facts. They told him they had a warrant. They told him they had searched his house. And then they told him they had searched the backyard. The interrogation footage captures the moment perfectly, a subtle flicker in his eyes, a barely perceptible tightening of the jaw. It was the first crack in his carefully constructed mask. When they told him they found Martha near the fire pit, a heavy silence filled the small room. For the first time, David Callahan's composure wavered. The lies had run out. The wall he had built around himself began to crumble. This is a chilling reminder of the psychology of a manipulator. Their greatest fear is not capture, but the loss of control. In that moment, David realized the narrative was no longer his to command. The detectives weren't guessing anymore. They knew, and he knew they knew. The psychological battle raged for hours. He twisted and turned, trying to find a way out, blaming drugs, alcohol, and most of all, blaming Martha. He described her as relentless, a woman who just kept arguing, a woman who never appreciated all that he did for her. All right, let's pause here for a moment. If someone in a relationship routinely rewrites reality, isolates you, or punishes boundaries, that's not love, it's control. Trust your instincts. Document what's happening, tell someone you trust, and make a safety plan. If you feel unsafe, seek local professional support or contact authorities. It is the classic monologue of the abuser, a grotesque abdication of responsibility. In this warped reality, a victim's refusal to be silent, their demand for basic respect, is reframed as provocation. It is a vital lesson for anyone trying to understand domestic violence. The abuser rarely, if ever, sees themselves as the aggressor. They are forever the victim of circumstance, pushed to their actions by the flaws of others. It's a disgusting, self-serving worldview, but it is the armor that protects their fragile ego. The detectives, however, didn't let up. They kept bringing him back to the cold, hard facts: the body, the axe handle, the lies he told on his doorstep. And then they played their trump card: Martha's phone, the very one he had used to send those cruel, taunting texts to Kim. Confronted with the physical proof of his deception, his composure shattered. The arrogance it takes to murder a woman and then use her phone to torture her grieving daughter is almost incomprehensible. It speaks to a level of cold, calculated cruelty that is truly staggering. Sensing his collapse, the detectives offered him a psychological out, a way to frame his horrific actions that his ego could accept. They presented him with a choice. Was he a heartless, cold-blooded monster, or was he a good man who had simply struggled for years with a schizophrenic partner and in a moment of weakness just snapped? It was a lifeline for a man drowning in his own deceit. It allowed him to confess without having to admit the entirety of his monstrosity. He could still, in his own twisted mind, be the victim. And he grabbed it. After nearly 4 hours of relentless, methodical questioning, the dam of denial finally burst. But what came pouring out was not remorse. It was a torrent of self-pity and excuses. The sounds of his sobbing were not for Martha, but for himself. It was the sound of defeat, the final pathetic collapse of a man who had been caught. He admitted to everything. The account he gave was a stark, unsettling chronicle of a final argument that spiraled past the point of return. He claimed Martha pressed him relentlessly. Years of resentment, he said, boiled over in a single surge. He lashed out, striking her with a handle from a tool, then applied sustained manual force that proved fatal. What followed spoke volumes. There was no panic, no call for help, only a cold, methodical pivot to self-preservation. He moved Martha to the backyard, and under the cover of night attempted to erase what he had done by using the fire pit to destroy evidence. When that failed to conceal everything, he scraped out a shallow pit and covered her there, turning the ground into a makeshift burial site. He wiped down the area, arranged the scene, and slipped back into routine, as if nothing had happened, living for weeks with the truth just steps from his back door. It was the portrait of a man determined to control the narrative to the very end, trading accountability for calculation and leaving behind a timeline as chilling as it was deliberate. With his full confession secured, David Callahan was formally charged. The search for Martha Freytag was over. But for her daughter Kim, a new agonizing chapter of grief and the slow grinding process of the justice system was just beginning. David Callahan was indicted by a grand jury on charges including murder, felonious assault, and tampering with evidence. Faced with his own videotaped confession and the mountain of evidence against him, he pleaded guilty. He was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. Justice in the legal sense of the word was served. A killer was put behind bars. But the case of Martha Freytag leaves us with profound and disturbing questions. This tragedy was not a lightning strike of random violence. It was the final predictable act in a long and well-documented play of domestic abuse, and it was in many ways preventable. Martha Freytag's story is a tragedy and a warning. She was a woman in crisis who reached for help and was failed by the very systems meant to protect her. Her legacy and her daughter's relentless fight can still drive change. It asks us to see the hidden victims, the ones whose voices are too easily quieted, and to remember that behind every file and statistic is a human being, a mother, a daughter, a sister, a friend. Martha deserved better. She deserved to be heard, protected, and safe. Her memory and Kim's unwavering pursuit of justice should never fade. Thanks for being here today. Stay safe and stay sharp. If this work matters to you, please like the video and subscribe so you won't miss our next in-depth investigation.